indigenous people from here are
Mhm.
very, it's incredible how present they are here. They are
Yeah.
yeah, they are very present in every sense.
Perguntas nos fazem ficar inquietos. Perguntas fazem o mundo girar. As grandes descobertas, as grandes invenções, os grandes textos filosóficos, todos partiram de uma pergunta. As respostas não são fáceis, exigem esforço e dedicação. E esse é o trabalho do pesquisador. Cada pesquisador e cada pesquisadora são pilares da ciência. São eles que movimentam e geram desenvolvimento social e humano e trazem respostas necessárias à vida moderna. E não é só isso. Também geram mais e mais questionamentos que fazem do mundo uma constante, um eterno descobrir. Nós, do Grupo CIDES, somos comprometidos com uma educação do futuro. Valorizamos e incentivamos a pergunta e, sobretudo, o trabalho do pesquisador. Venha conosco nessa grande caminhada pelo conhecimento.
Boa tarde a todos. É com muita alegria que estou aqui hoje para mediar esse painel. Meu nome é Dra.Beatriz Zoppo, sou doutora em Educação aqui pela PUC-PR, sou professora no curso de Pedagogia da Faculdade Fidelis e da Faculdade Modelo. É um prazer muito grande hoje estar aqui para mediar um painel tão importante. Justo a minha pesquisa foi sobre a formação do pesquisador. Então, essas experiências desses doutorandos que vão compartilhar conosco, com certeza enriquecerá o nosso conhecimento. O tema do nosso painel de hoje é o processo de orientação na perspectiva dos pós-graduandos, experiências das instituições parceiras. Estarão participando aqui a doutoranda Sandra de Lara. Ela é doutoranda pelo Programa de Pós-Graduação em Educação, aqui pela Pontifícia Universidade Católica do Paraná. Estarão participando de modo online a Carolina Penha, é doutoranda da School of Critical Studies and Education, de Cura of the Coron Acre, de Maturanga, da Faculdade Education and Social Work de Cura, a Coron Mitchutitekitanga. Vou deixar, na verdade, para que cada orientando se apresente, que eu acho que ficará mais claro. Temos também o doutorando Christopher Ryan. Christopher e Caroline, vou deixar que vocês se apresentem, que vocês saberão se apresentar de melhor forma. Passo a palavra agora para Caroline.
To Caroline, who will start telling us of her experience in this process of doctorate and in the process of guidance.
Oi, Caroline.
Hello, Caroline. Welcome.
Está compartilhando, Caroline.
She's sharing, okay.
Hi, everyone. I am Carolina Peña. I am in Oakland. It is 7:30 in the morning here. And I am very excited to be here, being part of this panel. So, well, I'm excited to be here and share part of my journey as a PhD candidate at the School of Critical Studies in Education at the University of Oakland, Waipapa, Taumataro. I would like to begin by saying that I am originally from Colombia. I am from a city located in the eastern range of the Andes, Tunja. Tunja is a city with 200,000 people approximately. And I finished my studies there. When I finished my master's in literature, I decided to leave my city and to travel Colombia to be exposed to the different contexts, different universities, different communities. So when I started working at Universidad Nacional de Colombia, I realized that working with the students with different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different stories, I needed to prepare myself. I wanted to expand my borders. I needed to learn if I wanted to give a contribution, if I wanted to contribute to my community. So that's why I applied to be here in New Zealand at the University of Auckland. Auckland is a beautiful city, but I wanted to share with you this small moment. So this is Mission Bay, and you can see in the back Rangitoto. Rangitoto is a volcanic island. It's a beautiful place. So New Zealand is full of beautiful places. And this to share that I am doing a comparative study between the Maori people, the indigenous people from Aotearoa, and indigenous people from Colombia, the Muiscas. The Muiscas are the indigenous people from my home city. I have been here for 1 year and 9 months. And well, it's been an incredible journey. So well, I am going to talk today about some points that are leading this conversation in the panel. So the first one is about the challenges in the relationship between a student advisor. The second one is about the vital elements that hold this process, this work with your supervisor. And the third one is going to be the strengths and weaknesses of the training process. And I'm going to finish by giving you some advices to the researchers who are doing their postgraduate studies. So I have to say that challenges, like this is a challenging journey for sure. If you're doing your PhD or your master's degree, or if you finished, you know that this is very challenging, but this is the point of doing this research, of doing this study. So I'm going to talk from my experience. So I'm going to talk about my challenges as an international student. So first, I have to say that language was one of my challenges because English is not my first language. So it was very difficult for me at the beginning to be able to feel confident when I was talking in English, to share my ideas. I was slower, like reading, writing, processing information. So that was my first challenge. How I overcame that challenge. The university has different language programs. So I was going to these workshops, to this activity the university has all the time, and that they're free. So that was my, what I found as a solution for me to improve my English. Culture was also very important because things here operate in a different way. I am from Colombia, South America, so things here are very different. So it took me some time to be able to adapt to where I am, and I could say that now I feel Auckland is my home. So that's something that I really value. Yeah, just now that I'm here and appreciating the culture and the place where I am. So in relation to the supervision meetings, of course, language and culture, yeah, that was like a barrier in this relationship with my supervisors. So what I did was being very strategic about planning my meetings with my supervisors. So I took my time writing, I shared my work with my supervisors, and I prepared my meetings. So because if I didn't find the words in English, if I didn't find like enough words to be able to share my ideas, I had my slides and my presentation, my diagrams and my maps. So that helped me a lot. Also recording my meetings, taking notes, and at the same time asking questions. I think sometimes we are afraid of asking questions, but I believe that's very important, asking many questions, as many as you can. And for me, relationship is a challenge itself when there is no relationship, because at the beginning there is none. So it requires to be nurtured, to be taken cared for. So that's what I did. So it's important to know, for example, when it's your supervisor's birthday, I know this, we don't really think about these things, but I believe it's important to create a friendly, caring relationship with your supervisors. So I would say those are my challenges, but at the same time, the ways that I have overcome those challenges. So I have identified different elements that help to the good development of academic research in relation to this process that you're having with your advisors or supervisors. So I think this thirst for discovering, this love for knowledge, the love that you and your supervisors have for the theme, for the topic, holds everything, holds the process. And at the same time, I believe care is very important. So, how? I have two examples. The first example is reading your supervisor's work. I think that's very important to read and to know what they are doing, what they have done, because actually it took them a long time to do what they have done so far. So I think it's important to read because you will also see how they can help you in your process. And when I was here, after 6 months of being in New Zealand, I had an accident. I broke my leg. I was roller skating and I had this accident. So I was here, no family, no many friends. I was feeling very sad. And yeah, there was a lot of uncertainty in my life. And my supervisors were there. I was vulnerable. I had to tell them what happened. And my supervisors were there to help me. So yeah, this is another example of caring. It's important to include care in this process of academic research that can be very like schematic. So we need to find some other spaces like this. Well, strengths and weaknesses of the training process. I think for me, it's very important to see how in this process I have gathered different tools that help me to be an independent researcher. And I think that's very important because now I can see that I have learned so many things that I didn't know before about being a researcher. And the best of all is that I'm doing a research on something that I feel passion for. I'm seriously so passionate about my research that I believe it is very important when doing a PhD. At the same time, at the School of Critical Studies in Education, we have different academic spaces. We have writing retreats. We don't have them in Colombia. I don't know why, but being here in my first writing retreat is something incredible for your process as a researcher. Being for days in a space where you can talk, share your ideas, share your challenges at the same time, it is incredible. We also have seminars, lectures, workshops, reading groups, writing groups. So we have all these spaces that help us to flourish as an academic. And voice. As I studied literature, this is very important in my process. And I have found that my professors encouraged me to find my own voice in academic writing. And I think that's very important to do when doing your research. Well, advices for the researchers. So after my accident, I realized that I wanted to create my family in New Zealand. And that's what I started to do. So I started by volunteering. I volunteered to be the monitor or the leader of a writing group. And it changed everything for me. Because being in this reading group, in this writing group, I met my peers. I got the chance to know their work, and also the professor who was leading the process. She has had experience for years leading writing groups, writing retreats. So this has helped me also to learn from my peers and also from this professor. So that's very important. At the same time, another example, I went to Europe. I went to Norway last June to be part of a conference as a presenter. And as I was going to Europe, I decided to email an Italian scholar that I have been following for years. I have read all his books. I know everything about his projects. So I was like, okay, I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to email him. And I did, and he accepted to have me in Venice in one of his workshops. So only with one email, I could be there in Venice, in Italy, learning from this scholar, and we are planning to do a collaboration together. So that's also very important. And because of my relationships, I also had a chance to work in an organization that provides social services for refugees. That's something that I'm doing now. So just because of being intentional with relationships, that's very important. As a second point, your curiosity, I think is so important to realize that your process is not lonely, that it's not about you and your PC or your books or your words. It's about where you are. It's about understanding all the connections of just being in a place, the people that are in a specific place, and all the things that you can create by being in a specific context. And I think sometimes we get distracted by this academic ego in which we want to show how smart we are, how good we are as an academic, but I think there are some other things underneath, right? So we need to challenge those academic spaces or those academic ideas that divide us as academic or as students or as researchers. I think it is more powerful when we work together, because when we work together, we can also expose our failures and we can be like more honest with everyone and with ourselves. Yeah, so I believe that's definitely something very important. Yeah, it's not about being perfect. It's about also taking risks, make mistakes, and work together. And finally, this is something that I have learned being here in New Zealand. I always appreciate where I was. Colombia is a beautiful, diverse, amazing country, and South America is incredible, Abya Yala. But now that I'm here, I can appreciate more who I am. And also, I appreciate our epistemologies from Global South, because now that I have had the chance to travel and to be in different contexts, I can see that how we do things, how we think, how we create together is unique to our own context. So I would say it's important to value who you are and to value the information, the knowledge that you have as a whole, as a person, because that's going to be very important in your work, in your thesis, in your whole process. So that knowledge, that information that you have is part, you're not starting from zero. If you are planning to start or if you are starting your work, you have a lot of information that you can rely on when writing and when doing your research. Well, that's all. This is my email in case you want to get in touch. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Parabéns. Parabéns, Carolina.
Congratulations, Carolina, for your resilience and for your process of doctoring and your passion for research. I think that that's what makes us researchers. Yesterday, Professor Mainardes talked to us about this interest and the wanting to be a researcher. This passion for research makes us really researchers, effectively. Now I pass the floor to Professor Christopher, and I asked him to introduce himself because it's very difficult, because she doesn't speak English, she's saying. So please tell us a bit about your experience. Professor, you have some 25 minutes for you to present so that we can have maybe a bit left at the end, sometimes for Q&A. Okay? So over to you, Professor.
Okay, muito obrigado. I'm not a professor yet, but thank you for the honorary title. My name is Christopher Irwin. I'm a graduate student, a Ph.D. candidate at Florida International University in Miami, and I'm so excited to be here. And I'm thrilled at the opportunity to hear everyone's perspectives and participate in the panel. And thank you, Carolina. I think I have have a lot of overlap in my experience. So I'm going to try to call out a couple of those key points. And I hope for all of our sakes not to go over 25 minutes before we open it up to the panel discussion here. So I think that will be maybe most exciting for the audience. I've got the same group of questions here. So starting with the challenges in the relationship between student and advisor, I will give you a little bit of a background. I'm not a traditional graduate student in the program where I am. I came to FIU, Florida International University, after 20 years of teaching high school physics, biology, and chemistry, and significantly older than not only many of my peers, but also I was almost a decade older than my first advisor at Florida International University. So I think there was a challenge kind of specific to me about what to do about a non-traditional student. But if anybody listening to this, now or on a video feed of this later is listening to this, actually, I think I think being a non-traditional student has really helped me in many ways. And so some of the challenges that have been most productive for me are just really trying to navigate what has been an awkward interaction and relationship with me and an advisor. Let's say because I'm nearly 10 years older than my advisor, it's a little strange for both of us. What I've learned in talking to some of my peers is that one of my good friends in the program is just out of undergrad. Basically, he's 25 years old. I'm 45. I don't think it's any less awkward for him. He just never had the age disparity as a convenient entry into the conversation to start with his advisor about, okay, how are we going to manage this relationship? And so I think one of the challenges that I accidentally was able to negotiate was just being such a kind of fish out of the water or an odd member of the cohort that it gave us a really easy excuse to talk about some basic things about to what degree is my experience going to be kind of a one-size-fits-all approach from my advisor. How do they see my unique contributions to the program or to the field, which in my case is the field of science education research. And something that it took me a while to kind of figure out was there's feedback that's important for me to get that I don't really know about. But as everyone is aware, our advisors have successfully navigated a lot of the milestones, probably all the milestones that we're seeking to get through, and so they have some knowledge that I don't, and therefore they have some perspective that would be valuable. There's also just there's feedback that may go beyond the bounds of dissertation milestones or getting published in a high impact factor journal that is important for advisors to give. I found that with my first advisor, and I ended up having my advisor leave 2 years into my program, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, but my first advisor, a lot of the advice that was important for him to give was interesting, but it didn't necessarily help me that much. I didn't know how to advance. And so again, that ended up being kind of great because then I learned that, okay, we need to have a conversation about what kind of feedback I need, what kind of feedback would help me. And so this all happened against a backdrop of my first advisor was not remotely knowledgeable or particularly interested in my area of research, which at the time when I started the program was kind of like decolonizing methodologies of secondary science education. So what is the way to teach Newton's laws that resists coloniality and predatory capitalism? So my first advisor was great because he wasn't interested in this. This wasn't his area, and so there was no preconceived notion about what the answer to that might be. And so the challenge we had to navigate was I had to do a lot of reading and thinking and writing on my own without that being guided by my first advisor. But then ultimately, it was really helpful to talk to somebody who wasn't already steeped in these ideas because I could see what got him interested, what got him excited, what he wanted to know more about. Eventually, he left the institution and I picked up a new advisor who graciously took me on, and that has been a wonderful experience. But she is certainly more of an expert in the area that I'm working in now. And one of the challenges of that is it is a little bit more difficult to forge my own path, because I think in the sort of ethic of care that my current advisor has and many advisors have, if they have done a lot of self-reflection and understanding their trajectory through the academy, sometimes the inclination can be to try to do you a favor and save you some of the bumps and bruises that they got along the way, and maybe smooth the path for you. Not that I want a difficult path necessarily, but there's certainly a tension and then a challenge to be negotiated between things that are interesting to me, things that I'm passionate about, like Carolina was talking about. We have to be excited to get out of bed and keep doing this, because it's not a high-paying, high-prestige profession yet to be in graduate school. And so as an advisor, maybe if you're an advisor listening to this, even if you think maybe this isn't quite the right approach, there's a balance between kind of extinguishing that flame of the passion that motivates students and saving them from maybe some mistakes down the line. And I think the more of an expert your advisor is in the particular take you're trying to use in your field, I think the more of a challenge it is to negotiate. I think just like broadly, one of the biggest challenges in the relationship, thinking back to some of my peers in the program, it's just that there's not a lot of reflective space to think about these types of questions that Carolina walked us through. We, at least in Florida International University, we kind of just hit the ground running, as the saying goes, and there's not a lot of reflection on what we're doing and why. There are just courses that you're supposed to take and milestones that you're supposed to hit, and it can kind of drag you along without too much thought if we're not careful. So thinking then about like what a vital element for good academic research in the process between advisor and student goes, for me, I think it really comes down to this issue that I sort of hinted at, is figuring out how we're going to allow for some type of emergent expertise. Almost every professor I've had has told me, at the end of this, you're going to be the world's foremost expert on whatever your topic is. But the way they embody that idea, my professors and my informal mentors and my dissertation committee and my advisor, really varies. Some of the people I've worked with at FIU really understand that to mean you're going to be an expert on something that is super duper specific, but already familiar to the whole field. And so what you're an expert in is essentially the thing that they're aware of, they're kind of interested in, but they're not interested enough to make that their career. And so what they are really good at, some of my mentors at FIU, is supporting you and picking something that they think is valuable, but they don't want to drop their own research to study. And then you're going to become the expert in that. And you'll work together with the same orientation on kind of parallel problems. And I think that work is really great and exciting for a lot of folks. The work that I wanted to do wasn't so much furthering the work of people that I work with, but it was bringing alternate perspectives in. And ultimately, that has really necessitated my advisor nurturing and being comfortable with a different type of expertise that I have and that she doesn't. In that we come at our work from very similar outcome standpoints of what we want to see in the world, the effects we would like to have science education and science education research to have. But ontologically and epistemologically, we could not be farther apart. And so necessarily, I've had to cultivate some expertise in her worldview, because just the power dynamics of she's the advisor, I'm the advisee, and I always have a lot to learn from her. I'm interested in it, and then anything I've read outside of that, in particular, materialist perspectives, that is not anything that she is necessarily knowledgeable or interested in. And so we have had a really beautiful working relationship, in that she's really encouraged me to become an expert in something that she doesn't know a lot about. She isn't quite sure how it's going to how it's going to lead to the outcomes that we both want, but she trusts me and our working relationship that we'll figure it out. And I think that has been really the most vital element. I think most professors are really comfortable with the idea that you're going to become an expert at something that they could have done, but chose not to. And if anybody is seeking a sort of different type of expertise, something that their advisor couldn't necessarily just pivot to and decide to do instead because it requires such a different theoretical disposition, or because the student they work with has just such a different embodied life experience, maybe because they're an international student like Adelina was talking about, or from my sociocultural theoretical perspectives are very different. Really navigating that is critical, I think. If that feels like it's not navigable, I don't think you have to fire your advisor necessarily, and you might not be able to. I think you just, if you're aware of that, then you can sort of find another place where your expertise can be cultivated. And I think back to what Carolina said also, when she emailed the professor in Italy and got that invitation to Venice. I had a similar experience. There's a philosopher. I'm in a department of teaching and learning, and that's outside of my field, but it was something that I thought would be useful. And I emailed a philosopher who had written a series of books that I was interested in, and he wrote me back. And through that relationship, I was able to kind of think through some of my ideas and not necessarily have to spill that into my advisor's lap and make that her job. And I think this is sort of getting to the strengths and weaknesses and advice now. I just want to call out being a grad student on some level is kind of a powerless position. We're sort of at the mercy of people who need to tell us that we're doing a good job. And many of us, we're still wired to try to perform school and be good students. And that only feeds back even stronger into this idea of, doing a good job and wanting to be validated. So that isn't necessarily a very powerful feeling, but there is a tremendous amount of power in being a grad student because there's no reputation to sort of protect or defend right now. And it's, so it makes it easier to send that email, like Adelina was saying. I don't know if my sort of professional goals are reached and I end up in a teaching and research position, 10 years from now, I don't know if I will be as quick to just send off an email to say, hi, I'm just a huge fan of your work. And, could we get together for coffee? But as a grad student, I think the social aspect is very important. And people, I don't know if it's true after grad school because I'm not there yet, but as a grad student, everybody I have ever reached out to for support, even if I'm just popping into their email totally unexpected, has been gracious and supportive. Whether or not they end up giving me a lot of time, maybe they don't want to, maybe they can't, but no one has ever made me feel bad for asking. And I think there is kind of a superpower in being a grad student. Most academics I've met, really remember that time, for good or for bad. And so we can kind of tap into some nostalgia there. I think there's some power there. I want to wrap this up. So strengths and weaknesses of the process, from the perspective of Florida International University, which is a pretty unique shaped institution. So the strengths are, at a large university, Florida International University is just gigantic. There are so many amazing people there. It took me a long time to meet a lot of them because they're not all in the building that I work in. But there are tremendous resources that are there, and we don't know about each other. But if we can get connected, that is amazing. And I think one of the other strengths, it's not my favorite thing, but the program I'm in is really geared towards kind of a replication of the academy. So if you want to learn how to come in and do, like good research and scare quotes and publish quickly, the particular program I'm in is great for that. I would say that, the flip side of that is maybe a weakness is that the methods classes are really focused on like a cookbook approach to research methodology. And in my own work, I've found that the idea, maybe individual techniques that we can think about what they do, and the effects that they have has been more useful for me. And because I'm just learning this, it's a lot harder when I'm presented like an entire recipe and then have to ask myself, like, well, what is the effect of, a tablespoon of cinnamon in that recipe? What if it was double that? If it's a very complicated recipe, which the research methodologies that I studied in my coursework always were, it was very sort of difficult to see all the intentional moves that we make that put together research. And so breaking out of that is a challenge, if that's something that people are interested in doing. And as far as advice, I think every time I've read something that I think is not going to be useful for me, but it's just an interesting idea, it's not at all related to science education research, it's not related to decoloniality or ontologies that resist hierarchies of domination, but it's just, a biography of Thelonious Monk or something like that. As grad students, I think our brains are just 24/7 orbiting around our research topics. And rarely does reading merely relax me. But when I read outside of my field, it relaxes me. And then it's almost always generative too. I know there's a lot of pressure to kind of stick to the path and go through this, but I really encourage anybody, listening or watching this later to read things that seem interesting, even if they don't seem particularly related. It's a very non-linear process. I think it's more like, riding a bike, learning to ride a bike than, swimming laps in a pool. There's going to be a lot of time where you're not visibly doing anything. But then one day, maybe you'll get on it and just go. That's how it's been for me. And taking courses, outside of the department, I'm sure we all have required courses, but the best ones I took were really, really far outside of not only anything in the requirements for my teaching and learning program, but really the classes that my peers who were also doctoral students were saying, why are you taking a Spanish class? Why are you taking, sociocultural theories through the sociology department? Those have been the most helpful classes for me. So these kind of aleatory chance encounters have been just as important for me as the structured parts of the program. And I just really want to close by reiterating, one more thing that Carolina mentioned is just there's a real important socialization aspect that has been the case for me. It sounds like for her as well. And just being physically around campus. When I started, it was kind of the tail end of COVID. There were no professors, no students around, and some people have stayed away. And in my experience, the students and the professors that have come back and found ways to connect just informally are more excited about what they're doing, whether or not it's a tangible resource or someone that is going to help me design how I'm going to analyze something or write me a recommendation in some way. It's been more exciting for me and been more motivating for me and my peers who are just around more and more social. And then there have been these sort of chance, meetings of people that have also helped too. So again, I want to close by saying, thank you to everybody, and I'm interested in the panel. And don't forget the power of being a grad student. We can just walk up and ask for help. It's hard to do, but I think this is the easiest time in our careers because people, they remember and they take some pity on us. Thank you.
Congratulations, Christopher. I share with you the same experience because I also not a traditional student. I started my doctorates at the same age as you. So I congratulate you also for sharing this experience with us. And when we talk about this experience, both you and Carolina have mentioned the importance of the multicultural experience. It is fundamental in this process of the construction of ours as researchers. And when you talked about email, I asked to speak because I found Professor Dr. Barbara Grant from an article that I read. And even without speaking English, I sent her an email that today she's here present and is going to be speaking in our Congress. So this boldness of ours in doctorate studies, I think that is all part as well. Thank you so much, Christopher, for having shared your experience. We also have now on our panel who has joined us, Marcos Flores Rivera. Marcos, please welcome. I'm going to ask you to do your presentation. And from right now, I'd like to thank you for making yourself available in sharing with us your experience in doctorates. Welcome.
Hola, buenas tardes. ¿Se escucha bien?
Can you hear
Muy
me?
bien.
Yes.
Bueno, pues un saludo desde
So,
México.
a greeting from Mexico for all of you.
Agradezco la oportunidad,
I
doctora,
thank
de
you
poder
the opportunity,
estar en
Doctor,
esta
to
presentación.
be
Gracias
here in
por
this
esta
presentation.
oportunidad.
Thank you so
Saludos a
much for
todos.
this opportunity.
Mi nombre es
Greetings,
Marcos
everyone.
Flores Rivera.
And my name is Marcos
Soy
Flores
actualmente
Rivera.
candidato
I am
doctorado
currently
en
candidate
pedagogía.
to doctorate in
Actualmente
pedagogy,
soy
and I'm
egresado de la
currently
maestría en enseñanza de las
am
ciencias
in teaching
por la
sciences
Universidad Politécnica de Pachuca.
in the
En esta
Pachuca
oportunidad me
University.
gustaría
And in
compartir con
this opportunity,
ustedes
I'd like to share with you.
algunas experiencias
So
que
I'd
he
like
vivido.
to share some
Y
experiences that
bueno,
I've
esta
shared,
servir
and
también
that
como referencia para estudios
this is a
posteriores
reference
a lo que siempre
for the
hemos
studies
aprendido del proceso. Bueno,
to
me
what we've been
gustaría
teaching. And I'd like to,
con el tiempo que me asignaron.
I'm going to do respect
En
the
esta
time that I was
oportunidad me
allotted.
gustaría abordar
In this
dos
opportunity, I would like
aspectos
to
vividos
approach
durante
two aspects that
este
I
periodo
experienced
de la
during
maestría.
this period
Bueno,
of
uno
my
es
master's
la
studies. One of
experiencia en
them
el
is the
aprendizaje
experience
del
and the
proceso
learning,
mediante
and
el
the other one is
acompañamiento
related
tutorial, que
to
me
the
parece también muy
tutorial
importante en el
follow-up that
proceso de
seems
la
to be
investigación.
fundamental in the process of
Un
research.
servidor
A server,
siempre ha tenido el deseo de poder
a
formarse como investigador.
somebody has always
Desde que
had the
estudié la
desire to
licenciatura,
be a researcher as
siempre
long as
tuve
he's
esa
been
ilusión de
graduate.
conocer
He have the
todo,
emotion of learning about things and learning how
hablando sobre todo
everything works,
los aspectos
speaking above
académicos,
all
cómo
about
los
the
alumnos
academic
aprenden.
aspects,
Un
how
servidor
students learn.
fue profesor hasta
This
hace poco,
person was a
fue
professor
promovido
up
a la
to a
dirección
little
de
while
un
ago, and I was
secundario
promoted
acá
to
en el
the
lugar donde
administration
yo resido.
here where I live in a secondary school in Mexico.
Entonces, durante estos
So
últimos 10
during
años
this
como
last
profesor
10
de
years as a
preparatoria,
professor
he
of the prep school,
identificado
I
cómo
have
surge la
identified
necesidad de la
how the
investigación,
need for
cómo
research
es que el
appears.
alumnado
How is it
requiere,
that the
o cómo
students
más bien el
require,
docente
or
requiere de la
even better, how the
investigación para que
teacher
pueda de esta
requires the
manera
researcher
poder
to
apoyar
be
al
in this
alumnado,
way
al
capable
estudiantado
of
en la resolución de
supporting the
muchos,
students
muchos
in
problemas que
solving
existen
many
a nivel
problems that
medio
exist
superior.
at the secondary
Entonces,
or high
en este
school
sentido,
level.
para mí
In this
esta
sense,
necesidad,
this
pero
is
también
the
este
need,
deseo de poder
and
investigar.
it's also the desire to do
Entonces,
the research.
comencé
So I
mi
began
formación
in
desde la
my
licenciatura, como he
graduation,
dicho, a través
since
de la
my
tesis de
graduation as a
licenciatura y ahora
teacher,
la
and
tesis de
then
maestría.
since my thesis,
A
and then
través de
now
lo
my
cual he
master's
aprendido
studies, and
grandes
through that
cosas.
I learned a lot
Creo
of
que
things,
más
and I
beneficiado en
believe
este
that the biggest
proceso he sido yo,
beneficial in this process has
porque
been
he
for
sido
me,
el principal
because I
actor
have been the main
de este
player
proceso y al ver
in this
cómo es
process, and in
que
seeing how it
los
is
resultados se
that
obtienen de
the
una manera
results are
tan
achieved
tangible, tan
in
visible,
in
tan
a way that is
práctica,
so
me
tangible, visible,
asombra y
and
me emociona
practical.
la
I
investigación.
am
Me doy
amazed,
cuenta que esta es la
and I
verdadera
love
motivación para
research, but
no
it also gives
solamente
me the
el
relevance that
campo
I have, not
académico, sino
just for the
también
educational
profesional.
field, but
Es
also in the
decir,
professional field.
cada docente
And
debería tener esta
each
preocupación
one
por
should
investigar
have
y
this
por conocer, por
concern to
saber
do
cómo
research, to
funciona
get
o
to know,
cómo
to learn
operan
how
ciertos procesos
certain
educativos que
processes,
pueden
educational
mejorar,
processes
ayudar a
work
mejorar,
that
por
can
ejemplo, el
help to
rendimiento
improve,
académico
for example,
de
the
los
academic
estudiantes.
yield of the students.
En mi
And
experiencia
in my
académica o respecto a
experience,
la experiencia
in
académica, puedo
terms of
decir
my
que
academic
esta
experience,
maestría
I
ha
can
sido
say
oportunamente
that
útil,
this master's course
me
has
ha
been very
salvado de
useful. It
muchas
has
cosas.
saved me from many
He
things.
compartido también
And
con
I
mis
have
asesoras
shared
de tesis
also with my advisors for my
algunas,
thesis
algunos
some
errores comunes que se cometen
mistakes,
en la
common
práctica
mistakes that are
docente
made
y que se
when you
pasan
are
por alto
teaching,
muchas veces
and
por
that often
ignorancia,
you
por desconocer
do
cómo
that and
funciona la
ignore them
educación.
because you ignore and you don't know
Y
how education
esto,
actually
de
works.
cierta
And
manera, la
this, in a
investigación,
way, the
el tomar
research
una
is to
maestría te
take
abre los ojos para darte
a course like this, a master's course, opens your eyes that you do have a lot to learn, that you have never finished learning. And so in my case, the direct impact has been in the classroom because, like I said, I have been a teacher for a long time. So when I apply directly this in my classroom, I can see the outcomes, both quantitative and qualitative, in terms of the research. And you can perceive this in a very visible and active manner. For instance, in the master's course, we developed work about the school resilience and how this promotes academic yield from the students from a prep school. So there I was able to see the before and the after. I was able to see how the students before had no resilience or had it in a low way, and how after a couple of months of generating resilience, academic resilience in them, they were able to increase their resilience and therefore also increase their academic yield and at a high level, which was a very impactful things for the student and also a good academic reference in the educational area. In addition to that, the results were also very tangible, like I said, because we were able to perceive in the classrooms how the students felt moved by learning and without fear, without tension in the air or whatever was researched at that time. At that time, it was chemistry. So chemistry and maths are science that are abstract and complicated for students and generate certain levels of fear, anxiety, stress for them. So all of this that was implemented in a number of strategies that was implemented in the classroom allowed us to see how these factors, thanks to academic resilience, were suppressed. And we were able to see a very calm and enthusiastic environment with the desire to learn. And we were able to see that the students also had the desire to learn and a specific enthusiasm for studying assertive communication values like empathy, trust, not only among them, but also with their teacher, which is key for learning for them. And we were also able to perceive a moment in the resilience, which was the building of inner strength. It was very impacting, very moving for the teacher because this has shown that research does work, that research, when it is applied and when it is undertaken in the proper and appropriate and pertinent, it has a direct impact on the people who are receiving this. And the purpose that research has, that I don't want to make it just into a document, but it must be applied in a real way, in the real world, in practice on the students. And as teachers, also this group, I was able to see a more motivated group and classes with a calmer and truer, with higher level of participation by the students, and a positive environment built towards learning. And professionally, also research has helped me to make decisions, which is something very important, that within the competencies of a researcher, you have problem solving as well, learn how to develop self-learning, which is very important in the formation of a researcher, because that is key. Not always there will be the whole time that we would love to have for the advisor, because sometimes we don't have the time to do that sort of academic work. Sometimes the researcher that is being formed has to look for ways on his own or her own to find the problems for the solution for their problems and to be able to achieve this competence that is so very important, and not just sit and wait for a path to be followed, defined by the guidance or the counselor. And when you're studying research, you have to be in the process of qualification, and you have to follow a path in which may lead to make mistake, which is not bad, because this is also a way to learn. And also I have found I have learned to fix myself on my objectives and obviously achieve and create new objectives, and also to be more creative, more dynamic in my love for teaching, more empathetic with the students, to be able to understand their needs and to be able to generate some competencies, among the most important one, which is the desire to learn and to apply strategies for learning, because that is key for a teacher at whatever level they're teaching, for the development of a level with awareness in proposing new technologies for the education. That is a competence. Another one is the design of learning experiences that are significant in and out of the classroom. This is something that is very important for me, because it has facilitated to generate knowledge among my students. And so now not only can I make my design based on some study, on some sort of theory, and replicate it, but now I can build my own design, or draft new ways of strategies for learning and teaching, which is another competency in a researcher. And this is the competencies, which is to apply methodologies in research, educational research, to identify and implement activities, teaching activities that will improve academic performance. This is all very important, because the methods that are implemented in the classroom will impact in the academic yield and performance, and the cognitive abilities and skills in the development of technologies of information and communication, among so many other things. This is going to help also to improve the performance, not only of the students, the increase in the academic, but also my own as a teacher, or the teacher's own. And another one in competence in this process is competencies that will help to learn, as we say in Mexican, to learn to learn. This is means that I can make a mistake at some point in time along the way, but that has to serve to me as a new experience to drive learning. And also, obviously, another important competence is the evaluation of the competencies of the students. That is also important, because it will help me to realize the academic process that I have achieved with my students. And another aspect that I would like to describe and share with you is related to the tutorial follow-up in the process of research. As you know, the tutorial follow-up is an interactive space that is open for dialogue, and it is pedagogic and scientific between the tutor and the tutee. And it is in full time also, because it helps the tutee to be able to develop skills and competencies in all areas. And in this sense, I had the opportunity to be able to be followed up in my research for my master's degree by Dr. Colonna, Reina Colo, Reina del Carmen Martinez, who were my advisors in my research, and I received a full-time support from them. The procedure basically in the work was to start first off with the presentation of the lines of research, to later be able to continue with choosing one of them, and then move to the work on defining the problem to be investigated, to be researched. And then later we followed up on the viability of the study, to later be able to approach the theoretical aspects of research, and then its scientific foundations as well, also based on empirical evidence. This was the first part of the research, and we in the program of masters, the tutorial follow-up, we had this twice a week, and that's when we received direct follow-up in terms of the progress of the research. And then after that, the feasibility of the study. We also investigated the theoretical aspects of the research, which are the theoretical milestones to be achieved, and also the scientific fundamentals based on the theoretical evidence. And later, we did the follow-up in the methodological approach, the work on the field, to be able to also finish in the results at the end of the work. It should be mentioned that in addition to these counseling, the research was also followed up in the process of obtaining the exam, the granting of the title, and also of coming closer to the research through the participation in congresses about research at national level and in the publication of articles as well. The opportunity that we had to be able to present this work and the results of the work that we did have been in two occasions. The first of these was in the National Congress of Educational Research here in Mexico. And the other one was a memory also for another Congress and an article that we have designed and drafted for educational research publication here in Mexico. I'm currently candidate to a doctorate in pedagogy by the National University Autónoma of Mexico, and the perspective that we have of this doctorate is that this might be or might lead me to a qualification in the field of research that will be stricter, and then I will have new skills and competencies that will improve and will allow me to promote and improve my work as a teacher. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I am currently the director of a high school. Therefore, it is very important for me to be able to maintain myself in the leading edge in terms of educational aspects, to be able to know how to guide my companions, my teachers, and my colleagues, and how to give support to the work that each one of them is doing. So in general terms, this is my participation, and I'd like to thank you so much for your attention, and I hope that each aspect that we have worked on may serve and help to increase and improve the performance of teaching and learning in teachers and students. And I hope I have helped each and every one of you. Thank you so much.
Parabéns, Marcos.
Congratulations, Marcos, for the process of sharing of your experience. When you talked about skills of the researcher, such as empathy, resilience, love for research, proactivity as a research, I remembered a book that I use, and it talks about this. It's the 30 skills of a researcher proposed by John Cresvent, written in the year of 2016. And what he brought effectively led me to remember this book, and it's really helped me in becoming a researcher, in being a researcher. I think this complements your lecture, and it is a referral for reading. The floor now to, thank you so much, Marcos. I pass the floor now to Professora Sandra, who is going to make her presentation and will tell us how this process of doctorate studies has been. Welcome, Professor, and as of now, I'd like to thank you for your participation in our Congress. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sandra Mara de Lara. I am a doctorate student in the PPGE program in PUC, Paraná. My counselor, Professor Pura Lúcia Oliver Martins. And I'm going to tell you that the first time that I entered a classroom here at PUC, the first teacher that I saw was her. She was Professor Pura Lúcia, and I fell in love with her. I always tell her that I fell in love with her, and I fell in love with research. And I did BBAC with her in graduation. We won 2 prizes in BBAC, and then then I became passionate about research, went to master's with her, and now I'm doing doctorate with her. So research for me is a passion. If I could put everyone to do research, I would. I always say, give me a topic and I'll go research it. I love researching. So this is something that makes me very happy. It's very good for me, brings me to the world that I like and love. So I also sometimes feel a bit strange because I have seen, I came a bit later into my doctorate students. My topic of research for my doctorate, which I intend to develop my thesis on, is socioeconomic and cultural factors as limitation factors for people to stay in distance education courses, analysis of proposals and interventions. My thesis means to investigate how socioeconomic and cultural factors influence the permanence of students of low income in pedagogy courses in the distance education modality. So I'd like with this research identify challenges, suggest interventions specific to improve the retention considering the specificity of this target audience, which is the distance education. Currently, I'm a teacher tutor at distance education in a private college. I work with the last course of the students, which would be their course conclusion paper. And I am passionate for what I do. I love distance education. I think that it is the future. And many things that we are today experiencing post-pandemic have led us to bring everyone to distance education. But distance education, I know some people have a certain prejudice and say, yeah, but it's distance education. But it does have the same content as graduation courses. What differs is the time and place where you study and your dedication and your autonomy. In doctorate, I'm going to follow a quick schedule that they gave me. What was my experience in post-graduation? What challenged me with my counselor? Me as a student, her as a counselor. I'm lucky to have a wonderful one. Like I said, Professor Pura. And normally, when I come in with novelties and she says that I fly too much, I'm always flying around. If she gave me wings, I would go, and she sometimes has to clip my wings because I love technology. I love some technological things, and she's not exactly very technological. So, what are our main challenges? I have to try to convince her that some programs, some technologies will bring benefit to the research. And then we talk about this, and these challenges end up helping us to enrich research. And always between her and me, we always have dialogue, a very open and good one. Our relationship is wonderful. I can tell you that I have a wonderful experience because for 10 years I've been working with her. So I know the way she thinks. When she looks at me, I know what she wants, how she wants it, and whether she liked or not my opinion. When she looks at me, I know, well, that's not going to work, is it, teacher? And she says, no, it's not going to. So she and I have a very good coexistence. The academic research between teacher and student with us is like this. We always dialogue and quite a lot, and she tries to bring me back to the ground. She says that I fly too much, and she's got to bring me to the floor, to the reality again, because my research for my love for research is bigger than me, and I'm not a small person. So even though I'm a good size, my passion for research is even larger. So what is your experience? What are the strengths and the weakness of the process of qualification in postgrad, in graduate students? And with my experience in PPGE, yesterday I was watching the lectures that we had from Professor Lucidio. He said some things that touched me. One of these was the quality of our research program at national level for post-graduation. the quality of CAPS, which affords us, in speaking about quality, that it affords us a lot of research, enables platforms that we can use for research at CAPS, in the thesis and also dissertations. We have a vast research material that is made available to us, and I think that this is part of our program as well. Another thing that I really like in our program is this interaction, the congresses, the interaction among peers, for you to exchange experiences, interdisciplinary with different other topics. So I think that all of this is very important, that you should not become isolated. When you say, I'm doing a doctorate, yeah, but doctorate is something that is lonely. No, it's not. I think that the doctorate is for you to interact, is for you to search, it's for you to multiply your knowledge, because both you retain that for yourself, but you're also passing this on to others. So, I like to know what Beatriz is researching. She's researching about epistemology. I'm there studying my own topic, distance education, and I find an article talking about epistemology. What do? I say, Beatriz studies that. So I save it to share it with her. And I think that that's it. That's research. It's sharing. We have to have this within ourselves. Sharing, participation in events, participate, publish, look to publish to our peers, so-and-so also studies the same topics I do. So I go over there, I work with her, we write together. So I think that the doctorate, masters, this whole sharing, research affords us that, to always be in contact, always be researching, working together. So for me, it is a pleasure to be in this. Another thing that yesterday, which Professor Dr. Gisele, which is the representative of CAPS, which said that I really liked the way that she said it in her lecture, was about implementing more for diversity, for minority groups. I thought that was very important. And I think that those are quality, those are strengths for our post-grad program. But also, I don't think that everything is flowers, okay? I think that the post-grad program should have more financial incentives, because mind you, and I'm going to give you an example of mine that happened. Every congress that you register for, today I just joined NDIP. It's 200 reais the registration. So if you go to several congresses, in each one of them, you're going to have to pay to be able to register and publish your research. And I think it's important that the master's students and the doctorate students publish. But for us here, it is too much. It's too high the cost. When you go to an international event, for instance, I had the experience of going to FERCI in Portugal. Counting all that I spent some 10,000 reais. For a Brazilian, 10,000 reais is a whole lot of money. So we really need to have more financing for us to be able to publish our research, to be able to go ways of going and attending to international conferences. Not just the people who can do this, but also because there's a lot of researchers that want to publish and do excellent research, but they cannot afford going to congresses. They cannot show their research. They cannot do that. So I think that there should be higher funding, something more in this sense in postgrad, even though there is quite a bit of things that we take advantage of, a lot of things in post-graduation. So I believe that this would be some of the barriers that we still face to and must overcome, because participating in congresses is publishing is part of research. It's not use research and put it in your drawer and not share it with anyone. I mean, you can do wonderful research, get fantastic outcomes, and then put it in your drawer and say, no, it's just me. It's not just me. It's shared. Otherwise, what good is it? For me? Yeah. So research must have this sharing. We must be able to share everything that we have learned, our knowledge, our discovery, help our peers, help and take this. When I was doing PBIC, we had a lot of research of observation in public schools and private schools as well, where we did some comparisons and some observations and so on. So for us to go into a school, teachers, directors would say, but why? Why do you want to do research if I won't even know what you've come to the conclusion? Because many of us do the research, but we do not publish it. We don't go back to the site of the research and show the results, show our conclusions, show what we saw. And that Professor Pura has taught me that when we did this report of the research, we should go back and give them a feedback on what happened at their school. And that's very important for those teachers who are there, who are our material. Also, I'm going to say the research material as such, that they should get our feedback, that they should have this access to our research. After all, they're also producers of research. So what I would say to a master or a doctorate students that's starting now, dedication. Dedication. Participate in everything. Dedicate yourself, communicate, talk to your peers, read a lot. Do not just stick to reading, because when we read, I say that if I don't have anybody to talk to about my reading, I'll record what I have to say. I record myself. I put myself and I begin to talk to myself. Why? Because what is reading when you're doing research? You need to have your criticality. You need to be able to read and see what that is telling you. In the course conclusion paper, I always tell my students, how can they do work? How they can create a foundation for it? I tell them like this, something very simple. When I receive a visit at home, I am an author. I go there, I'm going to receive Nova in my house. Will I leave him speaking to himself alone? I'm just going to say, go ahead, talk to me about distance education, that's it. And then I go out and then he speaks to himself. No. When you receive, when you talk to, and when you're reading about the topic of the book and the author, they are talking to you. They are talking to you and they're putting that out there. So when they are talking to you, you've got to answer, you've got to respond and dialogue. So writing, research is nothing more than dialogue, a dialogue where you take the foundation that they have, the fundaments they use, their research, and you put in your own discoveries together with that, and you talk, and you're able to establish a dialogue. So the research is nothing more than a dialogue that you're going to be talking about, you're going to be discovering, and you're going to be learning about everything. So whenever I'm talking to my students, I say to them, never leave the author speaking alone. You've got to have the criticality, and you have to be able to talk, have a dialogue, have the read, because if you don't have with whom to dialogue, that's why it's so important for you to be in a program, for you to be able to talk to your peers, for you to exchange experiences through dialogue, and that's very important. And I would say that today to masters and doctorate students, do study a lot, read a lot, but exchange a lot of information, conversation, dialogue, very important. Research depends on you working on this dialogue, on the reading, on the exchange. That would be it. And I am really passionate for research. Thank you so much. Professora Sandra. And thank you for sharing your experience. And effectively, like you said, there is no progress of science without the disclosure of the research. So there is no growth in it if we don't publish. We are not doctors of a single research, right? We have 6 minutes for some quick comments and questions. Professor Carolina, are you still online?
Yeah, I'm here.
Professora Carolina.
Professor Carolina.
A pergunta é:
The
obrigada
question
por sua
is, thank
fala.
you so much for
Como
your
uma mulher
lecture.
sul-americana,
How can a South
ela
American
tá-
woman,
pessoa gostaria de saber
the person
quais
would like to know
dificuldades você
what
enfrentou
difficulties you
além da
faced
língua
in addition to the
na
language
Universidade da Nova
in a
Zelândia?
university in
E
New
obrigada
Zealand?
por ser
And thank you so
exemplo.
much for being an example.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think it is about the difficulties that I have faced with language, right, here in New Zealand, as a South American person, as a woman as well from South America. Well, yeah, it's. I have faced, yeah, many difficulties with English, and it's been a challenge not only in my academic context but also outside. But I put myself in uncomfortable situations. So to give you an example, once I was here in the meeting, I saw Christopher. And I was like, "Hi, Christopher, how are you?" So I was trying to create a conversation with Christopher here. So that's what I do. I go to places and I go to places and try to just to create conversations, just to create situations in which I'm gonna have the opportunity to communicate. Also, I have a journal that is a personal journal. So I write in English, like everything that I have faced. So I have my academic writing, but at the same time, I keep a space that is for me to write and to share or to just to take everything like out when I need to. So something that has worked for me as well is films. I love films, and as I love reading, so I think that's helped me a lot about like how to overcome my difficulties with language. And I love traveling. I do love traveling a lot, a lot, a lot. And when I was in Europe traveling for the first time, I realized that English is very important to be able to know the world more. So I think it's when you see language from a perspective that in which you're going to discover, you're going to expand yourself, you're going to like find desire in your life. I think that's gonna work more than when you see like something that you must learn, that's something that is like very schematic or organized as a as a structure. So when you give yourself the chance to dance with words, with language, and also with people, I think that's a good way to do it. And it is a challenge, being here, but at the same time, I'm so happy to bring all my culture, to bring all this knowledge, and also to share with people here, because I have realized that not many people know about South America, about how things are done in South America, about our richness, and about all the things that we have to share. So also language became that channel in which I am able to share all the richness of our culture. So I think that's also very important. If we see language as something that is wider, larger, it's going to be much better for us as learners, and also for people. People are gonna, if they listen to us, also they want to know more about Portuguese or about Spanish. So yeah, I think it's about how we perceive and how we experience languages. And thanks for the question. Thank you very much. Obrigada.
Obrigada, professora Carolina.
Thank you, Professor Carolina. We could be here for hours talking with you four, because we have a whole lot of questions here. However, I'm going to read just a few comments that people sent, loving your lectures, your examples, and thank you for your sharing. They say that you are people who are special, resilient, and that you really roll up your sleeves and go to work. Being a researcher is really do that. Roll up your sleeves, go to work, Sandra, Professor Marcos, Professor Christopher, Carolina, and have love for research. And have the boldness, the daring to go to another country without speaking the language and facing it. So I'd like to thank the participants of this roundtable for their speech. I'd like to thank the participants that are here personally, the ones that are online, and we're going to draw the panel to a close because we have another event at 6 p.m. in this first Congress about the qualification of researchers. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for participating. Bye-bye.
Bom, boa tarde a todos. Estamos agora começando o último painel do dia. Nós vamos
Panel of the
receber
day.
agora
We're going to receive now with us Professor Barbara Grant from the University of Auckland, New Zealand, with the lecture, Students' Experience in Doctorate for Publication, Pressures, Challenges, and Strategies. Certainly, it's going to be very interesting for all of us, not just for the students, for all of us who have undergone this experience of having to publish pressure the whole time. Professor Barbara Grant acts in the Critical Studies of Education at the University of Auckland. She researches in higher education and critical university studies. Her current research products are the supervision of doctorate as a way of academic work, and she does that in terms of academic identity, and she explores with academic publications. In this lecture of today, she will finish this perspective of doctorates in academic publications. So Professor Barbara, please join us to gift us your knowledge.
Everybody for having me here and for coming this afternoon. And in particular, I want to thank Dra.Beatriz for her invitation email all those months, possibly years ago, and Dr. Julmera for her hospitality in bringing me here on my first visit on the continent and to Brazil. So I'm so glad to be here and have had such a great time so far. Okay, I was asked to talk with you about PhD student experiences of publication. I'm just going to kind of figure out whether I can get rid of myself away from this. Yeah, I can. Is this working okay? Cool, cool. PhD student experiences of publication, pressures, challenges, and strategies. And so I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about myself in relation. I'm going to be playing with two screens. This is going to go interestingly. No, it does work. It's just me. I just had this way. No? I might have turned it off, Jill, I think.
Yeah, turn it. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
No. Try again. Perfect. So I'm going to introduce myself in relation to this talk specifically. So what I wanted to say was that I have a long history of thinking about the nature of academic publishing, starting really with academic writing. I had an early life as an academic advisor working with undergraduate students on their essays, actually, and that really helped me to start paying attention to what is involved in academic writing, how complex it is, actually, and how difficult it is for some students in particular to get access to what it is to write academically well. Flowing out of that work, from quite an early stage in my own academic career as a master's student and then a doctoral student, I got involved in setting up writing groups with colleagues. So as a doctoral student for a long time, I had several writing groups with other doctoral students, and then later with colleagues, other academics in my university. And currently, I still run a writing group. Carolina mentioned it in her presentation because she assists me with that writing group. I've been running writing group for doctoral students in my school for about 10 years. I fell in love with publishing, perhaps through my own experiences of publishing. And so my first journal article was in 1997. I was obviously a mature student. And that journal article came out of my master's research. There it is, Disciplining Students, the Construction of Student Subjectivities. I love that article. It was my first academic baby. It still gets cited quite a lot. It's interesting. It uses Foucault to think about what it is to be a university student. It's been translated into Spanish. I don't have much work that's been translated, but that one has. I've also been running writing retreats since 1997. I was still a doctoral student, an early stage doctoral student at that time, and I set up some writing retreats for academic women, and those writing retreats, we still do them 3 times a year for a week away, still with a group of academic women, and I have run them in other countries and occasionally including academic men. For 6 years, I was executive editor of a Australasian, but really an international higher education journal called Higher Education Research and Development. That caused me to think a lot about what is involved in doctoral publishing, the changes in the landscape of academic publishing more broadly, but also doctoral publishing. It was a really interesting 6 years where I worked with a team of colleagues and friends in this editorial role. It was a lot of fun as well as being a lot of work. And then with my doctoral student Ling Ling Xu, I did a small project where we talked to the students in our Faculty of Education and Social Work about doctoral publishing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So I've had a range of different ways of engaging with thinking about what it is to write academically and what it is to publish. And it's that experience mostly, rather than scholarship, which sits in the background of what I will talk about today. One of the things that I can say is that since my first publication in 1997, there have been massive changes in what's happening internationally in academic publishing culture. When I began writing, the idea of publish or perish belonged on the continent of North America. Now it belongs everywhere. And that has been a huge change, and it has opened the floodgates for academic publishing, and I think a lot of people, and I listened recently to a panel of editors at a conference, of journal editors, at a conference that I was at in Hong Kong, and they said that the system is groaning. They're having enormous difficulty getting enough reviewers to do the reviewing work because there's just too much stuff flowing through the system. And a lot of those manuscripts are not very good, actually. But of course, in amongst the not very good, there are some brilliant manuscripts. And some of them are written by doctoral students. And what continues from this little introduction about myself, I'm going to talk about 2 things which are kind of contextual and a bit theoretical. I'm going to talk about the relationship between academic writing and publishing and academic identity, but quite briefly. And then I'm also going to talk quite briefly about the relationship between publishing and academic capitalism. And the reason I'm going to talk about those things is because it's very important to understand that when we enter the field of academic publishing, we're entering a social political landscape, which has got a tremendous number of fast-moving currents moving across it. And that a lot of the experiences that we have, that we think are our own experience, our personal experience, are actually artifacts of that landscape. So I'm going to try and just show you some aspects of that landscape. And then I'm going to talk about the pressures, the challenges, and the strategies. All right, doctoral publishing and academic identity work. When I started out being a doctoral student, as I say, I was a mature doctoral student, so this was in the 90s. The focus, both in practice and in the research literature, was very much on the product of doctoral education, which was the thesis. The written document that documented not only the research process, but more importantly, or maybe just as importantly, the original contribution to the field of knowledge that this thesis was making. And when examiners came to examine, they were not thinking about the person. Ideally, they were not thinking about the person. They were looking at the thesis. This was the thing. But over the last 20 years, and a whole lot of different kind of currents have come together to create this change, one of them being that the research into doctoral education is now broad and wide and deep, and so people's thinking about doctoral education and what goes on there has become a lot more sophisticated and complex than it was in the early days of researching doctoral education. So now what we have is a kind of a whole debate about the other product of doctoral education, which is understood to be the person, sometimes described as the identity, the academic identity or the doctoral identity, sometimes described as a subjectivity, depends a bit about where you sit theoretically, what language you use, and often you talked about through metaphors like development or construction or formation or becoming or socialization is another one. So now there's this real shift in focus on in doctoral education, we're not just thinking about the knowledge that is being produced, but we also should be thinking about the person who comes out at the end. And from this standpoint, I think in 2024, we might think, what is so new about that? But it's important to understand that this is quite a new focus, and a lot of doctoral education programs have had to shift themselves quite a lot to incorporate this focus, and I think that probably a lot haven't done that much so far. Ling Ling and I did this small project where we found that we were interested in the beginning of the project was to talk to the students in our faculty, the doctoral students in our faculty, which is a faculty of education and social work, about their experiences of doctoral publishing. We were getting kind of anecdotal stories of students who felt a lot of pressure to do it. We were aware that it was in education, it's not been a traditional expectation of doctoral education that a student would publish. And so we're kind of curious to find out what was going on for the students in our faculty. And so we sent out an invitation to a couple of hundred students, and in the end, we had 73 people who filled out a survey, and we had 14 people who had in-depth interviews, and out of that, together we wrote one paper, but Ling Ling has continued writing some other papers, which are very interesting, and I recommend them to you. They're in the reference list. One of the things I was interested in particularly at this time was to think about what the connection between publication and academic identity. Because she and I were both, she had done her doctorate on doctoral education. This has been an area of research for me, doctoral education. We're both kind of aware of the literature on identity formation and doctoral education and how it seemed to be quite dominated, isn't really the right word, but the most popular concepts that were coming through the literature in this case was the concept of identity trajectory. And a concept which kind of interestingly suggests kind of a straight line, strong movement of identity development. And we were kind of interested to have a look at what our students said and to think about what they were describing about their experiences of, as it were, becoming academic, particularly through publishing, and to think about them in relation to this idea. And what we found actually is that our students' stories of doctoral becoming, of identity formation, were stories that didn't really look like an arrow flying through the air. They looked more like a ping pong ball bouncing off walls, up and down and all around, going forward, going backward, making decisions, reversing decisions, experimenting with things, feeling uncertain often. So a very messy kind of process was what we saw, which also included difficult affects such as feelings of being a fraud that Dr. Lucidio talked about towards the end of his lecture yesterday, those kind of difficult feelings that doctoral students, that come on with the territory of doctoral education. So we had plenty of students talking about that. When we think about the relationship between doctoral publishing as being this kind of messy, bouncing kind of process where other people play a very important role, their suggestions, their opinions, the looks on their faces, and so on. What we found is that it brought doctoral writing and publishing into a different kind of focus, and that the emphasis that really came through in the interviews where we talked to students was the importance of the social practices of academic writing and academic publishing. And in fact, this has been an emphasis in the literature for a little while, and what we've found as a result of this emphasis has been a whole lot of new kinds of activities have entered the doctoral education space. The expansion of the how-to books on how to write and how to publish for students, but also for advisors. That's a whole field of kind of academic publishing in its own way, but also the shifts of practices, the kinds of practices that I've described actually, where people set up writing groups, where they do write on site sessions, where they meet in a room together for a time and just write alongside each other, the emergence of academic writing retreats. These practices, which are very much about the sociality of academic writing, are quite recent on the landscape of higher education. And they seem to be practices that can make a big difference to how students experience their relationship with academic writing and academic publishing. So it was my first kind of like, thinking about academic writing and publishing as intrinsically messy. I might even use the word chaotic kind of processes, and also as deeply social processes. But now I want to talk a little bit about academic capitalism. I'm sure that some of you will be familiar with this term, but for the purposes of my conversation here, in case you have not heard of this term, have not thought about academic work, academic institutions, academic research in this way, I think it's really useful to understand, to use this lens to think about what we do. So what does academic capitalism mean? It's a fairly new term. It's only been around for about 25 years, I think. It's a term to describe a significant shift in the cultural meaning of academic work that occurred in the late part of the 20th century. And it's a term that sharpens up our awareness about the purposes to which academic work is being put. Academic capitalism means the co-option of academic work for capitalist purposes, which means turning academic work and judging its merit and its value on the ways in which it can contribute to the capitalist economy. For those of you who are new to the university or new to doctoral education, if you're already aware of this, you may only be aware of it insofar as it feels like this is the way it's always been. But actually, this is not the way it's always been. It certainly wasn't like this when I entered the university as a graduate student in the 80s and the 90s. In concrete terms, as Aaron, you have written about with some colleagues, what does it look like? It looks like industry-academia partnerships. It looks like spin-off companies. It looks like patenting research results. It looks like Hot Milk, the institution across the road, which is the branch of this university, and nowadays every university has this, which is interested in the commercialization of what comes out of the university. Less concretely and more experiential rather than visible, as it were, it is the pressure to bring in research funding. It's the pressure to produce research outputs, publications of a certain kind, in the right kind of venues, because they contribute to university rankings, for instance, or they contribute to academic careers, academic chances of getting promotion. High university rankings attract international students, and they attract funders, and they attract faculty to come and work in universities. It's a kind of tangled bundle of mutually shaping influences, which is extremely difficult for impossible actually, for any university to stand away in the modern time. Academic capitalism makes us into entrepreneurs, us being academics, doctoral students, academic and staff, faculty, makes us into entrepreneurs, and if we're lucky, we become the star entrepreneurs, and intensifies the pressure for performativity. And some of the consequences of this, some academics relish this environment. They love the competition. They love the environment which is very much active in my university, of a kind of supercharged feeling of, if I can make it, I'll get the rewards. The fact that those rewards are almost always in a zero-sum game where other people don't get the rewards and feel the shame and the alienation that comes when you feel like you're a failure, kind of passes by when you're the winner, when you're on the winning side, I have to say. And one of the things that we know, and there's more and more research about this coming out of every corner of the globe, is that the effect of some of this shift in culture towards this increased pressure to perform is stress, burnout, anxiety, and depression among academics. There is a lot of it in lots of systems. I think particularly maybe in the sort of more developed systems, because maybe there's been an era where we can look back and remember an era where we felt we didn't have this pressure. And it is the case that in my system, this pressure never existed in the past in the way it exists now. There were other problems. Don't let me tell you there was a sun-filled landscape out there. But this particular set of pressures was not there. So just to kind of leave this slide, but this is a very important slide for understanding that, again, when we're thinking about what it is to publish academically, our thoughts are always going to be shaped and influenced by this kind of context, which means that there is the degrees of freedom around academic publishing, how much we publish, where we publish, they will, there's a narrowness there. There's a narrowness. Okay, let's move away from those kind of big picture things now, and I want to address you more as acting agents in the landscape that I have been trying to paint here. And I'm going to start by acknowledging the different kinds of pressures. So some of these will be connected to what I've just talked about with respect to academic capitalism and with respect to the way in which academic writing and publishing are entangled in the making of ourselves into academics and the feeling that we're in our skin as academics. So what are some of the pressures? And I think I've canvassed what I think of as the main ones, but there will be others as well, of course. One of the main pressures now, and we've talked about this in some conversations during this conference, has been what is needed, or what we think is needed, to get an academic position post-PhD. And that has changed. And one of the drivers that's changed that is the volume of PhD graduates coming out of the system and the competition. So not so long ago, to have the PhD was itself enough to get an entry-level academic position. And then you spent the next 4 to 6 years showing your chops, as we say in English, proving that you can hold that position. That has changed enormously now. And so now institutions are looking for, yes, you've got the PhD, but what publications have you got, and where are they? There are also publishing pressures that sometimes arise out of obligations to funders, and obligations, I might say, to research participants, the sense of obligation, which came up a little bit in our panel recently when they talked about, particularly Sandra's contribution, where she talked about the importance and the responsibility to publish. In some systems, not in New Zealand, I don't think it's the case either in the US, and I don't think in Brazil, but in some systems, Turkey, you have to have publications in order to graduate PhD. So you may have finished your thesis. It's done, is it here too? Okay, I should have asked you this question, Jill, but I forgot to. In some systems, the PhD thesis and the successful examination of that defense of that thesis is not enough. You may have done all that, but until some journal accepts something from yours for publication, you don't get to graduate. And that's a tremendous pressure on students and on their advisors alike. In China, no, it's not like that in China, actually. I was about to say it, but no, it's not. There's pressure from advisors and supervisors, and those pressures can have different starting points. Sometimes they can arise out of them thinking that you are very capable of this, and they want to foster your academic career, give you the best start, and so they really want to encourage you to get publications. But there are other more shadowy forces at work here, because more and more nowadays, doctoral supervisors become co-authors. When I was a student, no. And not in education. Sciences, sure, but not in education. Anything I wrote out of my doctoral work was my own authored material. But nowadays, some supervisors will basically say, if I'm your supervisor, I will be a co-author. And some systems are really encouraging this to be a feature. And so in my country, our national research audit, which counts publications, for some supervisors, this is a way to increase the number of their publications, is to ride as co-authors on their doctoral students' work. And there's nothing intrinsically unethical about that, but my view is if what you're doing with your student is in the normal run of supervision work, maybe you're not an author. At times, of course, you and your student might write something together, and then that is a different kind of, then maybe you are a co-author. It's something that actually takes quite a lot of thought about. And if you're interested, I did some of that work to develop a code of practice for my own school a few years ago, and so I have a document which has got some ideas around that, so I'd be very happy to share that with anyone who wants to. Just write to me and I'll send you the copy. Another publishing pressure is competition among peers. It doesn't happen everywhere. Carolina acknowledged that it is a possibility and has talked also about being grateful for not feeling that, but it's very real. And we saw it in our interview material that students feel alert and aware to who else around them is doing what and how successful they are. And they feel pride. In some of our interviews, our students were very proud of their publishing, and in other interviews, students were very ashamed because they didn't have published. They weren't published, and they felt that their Ph.D. experience was somehow second class because they didn't have this publishing profile. And then another publishing pressure, of course, might be our own desires to write, to be out there, because the experience of that first publication, the one I love for myself, it was for me, it broke a glass pane between me and an academic life. That first publication, I was like, I can do this. It was a huge shift for me. And many of you will feel like that as well. You'll be feeling like this is a kind of moment to prove myself. I can tell you that this feeling doesn't go away across an academic life. You can continue to feel like this about publishing. So our own desires are entangled in this. And of course, our desires don't just come from nowhere, and they don't just come from our mum and our dad or wherever. They also come and they are brewed in that stew of academic capitalism that I described, because it sets up new norms of performance, competition, being the star, being better than others, which feed our desires. So our desires are caught up in that complicated place. And then the performative academic culture, you know, if I'd been reading and writing and thinking about this thing, but I don't have a publication, does it really count? And so the whole thing about having publications are very visible, they're very countable. And so, the point I was going to make about China a little while ago was that what I understand with my international Chinese doctoral students is that when they go back to China after doing their PhDs in New Zealand, is that they must have 3 publications to apply for a job. So they've got a number, they know when they've got those 3. There are so many other things about academic life that we never know if we've achieved or not, but we can count our publications. And then another pressure, interestingly written about in this article with the title of Trying Not to Lose Myself, is this student writes about his experience of trying to hold on to himself, his intellectual integrity, and not become intellectually emptied by these kinds of pressures. So it's a wonderful piece, again, it's in the list of references, about how the pressures to publish can displace our genuine desires to want to speak. It can kind of push them away, and so that we feel a kind of pointlessness about what we're doing. The pressure becomes so much that our own feeling of commitment and desire is flattened, it goes away. And I've seen that, I felt it from time to time, that feeling that there's so much pressure here, I don't want to do anything. There will be other pressures that you can think of that will be maybe unique to a situation or just things I've overlooked, but that's quite a swag, right? It's a lot of pressures. That's a lot of pressure. And they come from lots of different quarters. And that's again what Ling Ling and I saw in our interview material. The pressures came all sorts of places at all sorts of times, and the students were constantly trying to sort of respond and negotiate and make a decision, if not now, maybe later, and so on. There is a bit of a soft line between pressures and challenges, just let me say this to you. So some of the things that I've got listed here could also kind of come under pressures as well. I'm going to focus at this point, for what I'm going to say now, on the journal article, because that's the kind of, in education in particular, it's the coin of the realm. It's the thing that we mostly do. Some of us write books, but more commonly, we publish journal articles. So, what I want to say, one of the challenges for writing a journal article is knowing how to write a journal article, to know what a journal article is. It's a genre. It's a particular thing. It's not the same as a book chapter. It's not the same as a research report. It's not the same as a thesis. It's not the same as a piece for a daily newspaper. It is a particular thing. And one of the things about the journal article that's crucial to the genre is that it contains some kind of original insight. So it can't be published before, unlike a book chapter, and it has to have a sense of what it wants to say that is very clearly laid out for the reviewing readers who will be looking at it, saying, what does this manuscript, that's what we call a written document before it's published, what does this manuscript have in it that is new for this particular field or subfield or study? And sometimes, my own experience here, this is really hard to figure out. You have a feeling, you have a hunch, but actually working out what it is that you have to say that's a new contribution and being able to place it in the field that it sits in and show its value is actually really hard. So that's one of the challenges, is figuring out what the journal article genre is, and then being able to identify this thing that it has to have. Another challenge, and this is not a small one, and I've experienced this with my own doctoral students and also in my own experience as an academic, is how much time it takes to write a good journal article. There's quite a lot of language around, in my place at least, about knocking off a journal article. Whenever people say that, I feel like barfing, frankly. Knocking off a journal article, knocking off an original contribution to a field, it seems somehow to me to be insulting kind of language to use to describe the hard work that writing a journal article involves. For me, it usually takes me at least a year to write a good journal article, often longer, because of that process of trying to figure out to go from the hunch that I've got something to say to really figuring out what it is that I have to say takes a lot of time. Writing, reading, thinking, writing, reading, thinking, talking, sharing with others, getting their feedback, and so on. So it takes a lot of time. And as doctoral students, as doctoral candidates, the clock is ticking, right? There is not actually a lot of time. And the critical document is the thesis, and it also takes a lot of time. So there is a kind of tension here. One of the ways in which that tension is being solved nowadays is by promoting the doctorate by publication. And so this is a model that tries to get both things done at the same time. But it's not an easy pathway. It's not an easy pathway, but it's a very rich pathway. And I've seen some students write wonderful doctorates by publications. Another challenge is readiness. Am I ready? And again, I think often with doctoral students, that readiness is something that kind of comes later in program. Partly it's contributed to by putting in the hours, putting in the time to do the reading and the writing, to come to get a feeling for what your topic, how it sits, where it sits, how it belongs in the field, what else has been done about it. But also, I think, and this is the point that Sandra made before, the experience of going to conferences and presenting work verbally is part of getting ready. And mostly, the first year is not the year for this. Maybe the second year. year, by the third year and so on, I think it really is a good time to start getting out there and talking. And this is part of readiness. But then that sometimes means that the time when we're ready to start thinking about publishing is also the time when we should be finishing the thesis. So there is this kind of complicated equation going on all the time inside doctoral education about how to allocate time, how to make priorities to ensure that we meet the deadline. And my system, once you go out of time, things start getting a lot tougher for you as a student. A whole lot of pressures come on, scholarships run out, and so on. So it is it's a complex and equation which has serious consequences. Another challenge is finding an authorial voice. So I think one of the things that I love thinking about with the writing group, the doctoral students writing group, is how the process of doctoral education is a process of transfiguration. It's a process of moving from being a student with a student's voice to being a scholar with a scholar's voice. And it's really hard to explain what that change is about without telling a student to write like you, right, as a supervisor, which is, for me, is not the way. So what is it? How does that change come about? And again, it's not one of those arrows that flies through the air. It's a very messy, backwards and forwardsing kind of process. And it's a process where, at its best, an original voice arrives for the student, and a voice which is distinctive and not like every other academic voice. So finding an authorial voice, often I think my students submit Ph.D. theses that really haven't got that voice yet, but it's glimmering, it's there, it's arriving, but it has not yet arrived. But with a journal article, you want that voice to arrive. And so this is one of the reasons, of course, to consider writing a journal article during doctoral candidature, because it's a compressed piece of writing compared to the thesis, and it's a place where you can begin to try and push that voice to arrive. That voice that stands in a more centered way in relation to what it knows and what it doesn't know, and that's left behind the voice of the student, which I think is often heavily oriented towards pleasing. I mean, the doctoral thesis voice has got that problem too, right? It's got to please the examiners. And journal article manuscripts, you might want to please reviewers, but really, if you try to be too pleasing to the reviewers, that won't cut the mustard, because that won't be doing what the journal article needs to do, which is make a kind of claim out of your own thought, research, and writing. Another challenge is the internal enemy. This is Dr. Lucidio talked about this yesterday, and these are actually his words. I might have called it the internal critic, but he called it the internal enemy, which is more powerful. I really like that language. And he said, and I'm quoting him now, he says, "The one who says you cannot do it." And for some of us, there's many of these ones, and they sit, and this is a well-known phenomenon in the literature on writing, not just for academic writing, for fiction writing, for all sorts of writing. The one that sits on the shoulder and just keeps telling you cannot do it. You're not good enough. Your voice is immature. It arrives and it sits on my shoulder still sometimes. And I'm an old lady. You would think it would be gone by now, but it's not. It comes back from time to time. It sits on the shoulder, and I have to take a lot of energy to shut it up. Here. Little demons flying around. Little demons. Oh, I love this too. Vulnerability. The vulnerability of nakedness. It's part of academic writing too, and it's part of publishing, I tell you what. You send that manuscript, that thing you love, that you think is really good, you send it off into the wide, wide world. Oh, it's a vulnerable moment, particularly when the reviews come back. So that's another, the internal enemy. The politics of authorship. So I've alluded to these a little bit already. Typically in doctoral education, they're likely to lie in the space of the advising relationship. So it's going to be really important to have the quality of advising relationship that we heard Carolina and Christopher and Marcos and Sandra talk about, which has got a relationship which has got elements of trust, of honesty, of courage, I think maybe there, of care, and not just all of those, not just from the supervisor, but from the student as well. Because in that kind of context, you can have good discussions about a sensitive issue like co-authorship, but it's very easy to feel that you cannot have those kinds of discussions, or to feel that whatever your supervisor says is what has to happen. And sometimes, unfortunately, that is the situation. Another challenge, and here I am in Brazil, completely unable to speak Portuguese, apologies. Another challenge, which is everywhere in academic publishing, is the expanding global hegemony of Anglophone publishing. And so the journal ranking systems, wherever they exist, are pretty much captured by the Anglophone journals. And this is a problem. It's a strength for academic culture in some ways, because it allows communication, as Carolina talked about going to Europe and found her English was very helpful for her there. But from a political perspective, it's a problem. It's a problem. Maybe technology is going to slowly kind of, like the amazing technology we've had at this conference for helping us to speak to each other, maybe it's going to smooth out this problem. But there is a problem there, and I don't know what the answer to that problem is. But I want to mark it so that, to acknowledge it here in Brazil. Another kind of publishing challenge, but this can also be a pressure, is the invitations that arrive in our email boxes from predatory journals. These are journals that kind of basically seem to publish, they suggest pretty much a guaranteed publication. The problem with them is they don't usually have good review processes, and they often charge quite a lot of money. And so they will kind of offer that, and the inexperienced academic might think, well, if I pay that money, I'll get that publication, and then I'll be able to pass my PhD, or then I'll have a publication on my list for when I go for a job. Predatory journals have no reputation. And so if you pay a lot of money to get published in one of these places, and you'll have this on your CV, it does nothing to help you, actually. In fact, it may be even a vulnerability in your CV. Probably not so much, because if it's something that you've done right at the beginning of your academic career, you'll be forgiven for it. Not so much later. But yeah, it's going on. There's heaps of predatory journals out there, and they can do a very good job of looking like they are very authoritative, have good reputations, but they do not. Somebody out there compiles a list, and so if you if you're wondering, you talk with your supervisor, your advisor, of course, but there is also information on the web. There are some people out there are watching, and they're making lists, and you can put in the name of your journal and see what comes back to help you, to help guide you. And then if you do send your lovely manuscript off out into the ether, take the risk, do all the work, figure out what it is you want to say, take the risk, send the manuscript away, then the next challenge is the review material that comes back. And it's always a challenge. No matter how many times you've written articles, you can be sure that your reviews will come back with things that you didn't anticipate, sometimes written in a cranky tone that you have to deal with, things that might make you feel like you've been misread, misrecognized, things that might suggest that you have to do so much more work on your manuscript that your heart breaks and you head for the wine bottle. So the reviews, dealing with reviews, particularly when they're conflicting ones, is another challenge. This is a challenge where good friends, a good advisor can be extremely helpful. It's a good challenge because it means you've got your manuscript out there, right? Compared to the other ones, which are kind of challenges to even getting a manuscript, this is one that says you've got your manuscript out there. But I have seen people who have been so knocked by the experience of reviews that they've taken that manuscript and put it in a drawer or a folder on their computer marked black hole, and they've never brought that work out again because of the kinds of reviews and the way their reviews struck their heart. So it's not a small thing. And when you start reviewing, which you will do, and you will have to do, otherwise the system is going to just crash and burn, remember the heart, that if all manuscripts are written by people with hearts. Try and speak to that. Okay. The third thing I was asked to talk about in this little lecture was publishing strategies. There are so many publishing strategies written about in books on how to get published. And your own advisor, supervisor, will have suggestions for this as well. But I thought I would just put down some things that I think have been really valuable for me. Find your angle. Find the thing you have to say. And there are a couple of suggestions on this slide that I have. These are techniques that I use at writing retreats and in writing groups, and I use them on myself. So they're not things that I don't think are, that I think for others, the things I use for myself. One is the list of questions, which is by a guy called Brown, Brown's questions. 8 questions to work through in relation to an idea for a journal article. His argument and my experiences is that if you can work through these 8 questions, you will gradually get clearer about what your angle is. So there they are, listed down here. Takes quite a lot of time to do this. Often I find if I try and use Brown's questions when I've got a very early idea for an article, I can't even answer some of the questions very clearly, and I have to actually stop and go away and do some more thinking and some more reading and then kind of come back to these questions. The other little technique that has been very useful is something that came to one of the writing retreats. It's called the OOPSLA abstract formula. OOPSLA is a big computer science conference, I think. And in this one, is the writer of this suggests 4 sentences in an abstract. And again, I think when you can write those 4 sentences about your idea for your journal article, that will give you a confidence that you know what it is that you have to say. In both cases, with the Brown's questions and the OOPSLA abstract, quite often I use them right at the beginning when I'm starting to think about what I'm trying to write. And then I always, or almost always, have a point in the writing where I get stuck. I had a plan, the plan has failed. What am I going to do? I go back to Brown's questions. I go back to the OOPSLA abstract, and I go back to a third technique, which is writing a nutshell. Just fast writing for 5 or 10 minutes. What am I trying to say here? And I just write. I usually do this by hand. I just write that to try and get back to what it is that I'm trying to say. Because often the angle in a journal article, as I've said, particularly in our discipline or our field, is elusive, it is slippery, and it has to arrive. It has to arrive. And it arrives through the process of reading, writing, thinking, talking, getting someone to read a draft, seeing what they think, reading, writing, thinking. It arrives from a mess of different activities and from reading books like Christopher described, the book he read about Thelonious Monk or something, whatever, a random book, keeping yourself reading out there in the world and noticing, reading poetry, so on. Sometimes that's the place where that helps. That kind of reading is what helps our idea to arrive. So again, it's not like this arrow or this straight line and 10 hours work, I'll have a journal written, 20 hours work or 50 hours work, I'll have a journal article written. Mostly it's way, way messier and more unpredictable than that. So finding your angle takes time, and it takes nourishment to your mind to find the angle. Another publishing strategy is to form a writing group that is a writing group of people who want to publish an article. And there's various models for this out in the world. The kind of classic model is one where people meet for like over a 3-month period, and they meet once a week, once a fortnight, whatever, and they are all trying to go from having an idea for a manuscript to actually having a manuscript by the end of that time, and they meet and they set goals with each other, and they talk about what they're doing, and they maybe read each other's work, and they might get people to come and talk to them as a group. But it's a sort of short life writing group with the purpose of producing a manuscript for publication. I think it's a very successful version of a writing group. How big is a writing group? 2, right? 1 is not a group. Even if sometimes you feel like in your head that there's a group of people in there, 1 is not a group. But 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to, I've read, I think up to 12 potentially. It gets harder to keep things rolling. I think it's better to be small and all very committed. So that's another thing you could do with some doctoral colleagues, maybe some peers, is to set up a group where this is your goal and you work together on that goal and give each other moral, intellectual, emotional support. Because I think that it requires that, actually. It's a lot of courage in writing for publication. Co-authorship can be helpful here. So I'm a writer who probably prefers, by and large, to write alone, but I have co-authored things, sometimes with friends, and that's typically been the easiest, although not always, and sometimes with others who I wouldn't call friends, but they've been colleagues who where our paths have crossed in some way, and we've agreed to do this. And that can be interesting because you can meet somebody or not know someone very well, and then when you write together, you learn a whole lot more things about them that you didn't know before. And of course, that can be wonderful, and it can be difficult, that experience. But the thing about co-authorship that can be really helpful is, there's more than one mind on the work. But the thing that so I like that about co-authorship, but the thing I find really helpful is I promise my co-author I will write something by a date, and I do it. Because I'm a responsible kind of person. When I promise myself I'm going to do things by a date, maybe I do try. I think I've got better, but still, it's easy to give that away. But for me, when I've got a co-author, it increases my ability to say no to other things and to prioritize my writing. So co-authorship can be helpful, but it is not always helpful. Choose carefully. And the fourth thing I have to say is consider your target journal. And when I did that very first publication out of my master's thesis, I talked to a scholar who had been my teacher. She was not my supervisor, but she had been my teacher. And I asked her advice about, how do I do this? And she said to me, like, how do I send it to a journal? I had no idea. In those days, you sent big envelopes full of paper away. And they, from New Zealand to anywhere, took like ages, right? Not as long as like in the 19th century, but still took a long time. And she said, choose 3 journals from your reference list, the reference list of your manuscript. Choose 3 journals that you have cited. Rank them according to your desire, which one you would most like to see yourself in, and make that ranking. So you've got 3, 1, 2, 3, and then send the first one off to the first journal. When it comes back rejected, you've got a second journal already in your mind to send it to. It was great advice, very robust kind of practice. Question, how much do you join the conversation of your target journal? And so when I was an editor for that higher education journal, we would get manuscripts that had no mention of anything ever written in that journal, even though the subject they were writing on was one we had a lot of publications on. And I would mostly send those manuscripts back and say, if you want to join our conversation, do that and resubmit it. But otherwise, go for a journal where you are, like they had reference lists, they had plenty of options. I think they thought we were a soft touch Australian, as Australian, New Zealanders. I don't know. Anyway, so the question is, how much do you join the conversation of your target journal? If you choose journals based on your references, you've already kind of making a decision. You've already got material. You've already done that. If you have a journal that you would love to be in, and I've done this sometimes. I've written the manuscript and thought, I really want it to go there. I look at my reference list. I have no references. I will go and have a look at that journal and see what there is and see how I can engage with what has already been published. Because there's something about journals being places of conversation over time that I think is really important. So it's a question. Not everyone thinks this is something you should do. It's something that I would do and I would encourage my own students to do. Okay, we're just about at the end. One of the ways that academic publishing is talked about a lot is playing the game. And I can see why, because there's a sense in which there are some common practices that are almost like rules that it's important to understand. But I also don't like that language very much because it just makes us all into gamers. And I think that for me, my academic work, my research, my writing, and I would say for my doctoral students, they are pursuing questions that really matter to them. Think about, I'm thinking about Marcos in the panel today and how the commitment to his work and to the way his scholarly work intersected with his practice. He's not playing, there's nothing about the game here for him. This is stuff that really matters, stuff that he hopes can change what goes on in the system that he's working in. I would rather talk in that kind of language myself. So I do sometimes talk about here are some of the rules of the game, but I try not to push that metaphor too far because I think it's a metaphor, it's a cynical metaphor. And so if we get too cynical in higher education, we get to a bad place. We get to a bad place. More importantly, academic publishing is about how academic communities communicate. The tradition in academic work is to communicate through writing. It's not the oral tradition associated with other cultures and other times. It's we do, like here, but for enduring, for getting our work out in a way that lasts inside an academic community, publishing our writing is the practice. And so it's how we communicate with each other, and it's how the pool of academic knowledge grows, how it deepens, how it broadens, how it becomes more interesting. It's a responsibility, and I heard Sandra say that really clearly. It's a responsibility. We've been using public money, typically. We've involved, often in educational research, we involve human participants, where we have established a kind of contract. So there's layers of responsibility to publish and what it is that we've learned, what we've come to understand through the research we've done. And it's also a triumph. It's a moment of, whoa, I've done it. I'm out there. I am a scholar. I'll be noticed maybe. And that's a very important part of being an academic as well. It's a coming into your academic self. You don't stay there, in my experience. We come in and out of that academic self. That's the fraud bit. More or less, have days of feeling quite fraudulent, but it's an arrival. And if we've arrived once in this way, we can arrive again in this way. And it's powerful, it's pleasurable. And when people read our work and want to talk to us about it, it's marvelous. It's marvelous. Because it is a coming into an academic space, an academic self, it's an ethical space. It's a space that should connect to our deepest held values and beliefs about what it is to be an academic, what it is to be a good person in the world, what kind of scholar we want to be, what kind of role model we're going to be for our own doctoral students when we have them, or other scholars around us. It's a place to think about who we need to communicate our research to, not just who the institution is pressurizing us to talk to. They're always going to pressurize us to get our stuff in the top-ranked journals. But actually, our audience may be somewhere else. And we need to think about that. And we need to also understand we can write the same material for different audiences, and that as long as we can sort of meet that standard of the original contribution, we can have more than one. We can have more than one kind of publication. People in the community are not going to read journal articles. We have to write in other places for them. So it's an ethical space that makes it deeply interesting for us as human beings. So What are my values? So in amongst all the pressures and the challenges and the strategizing, which is another language for playing the game, it's really important to think, to pause and think, and to follow what matters to you as much as possible when you go about publishing your academic work. And that's my final thing to say. Thank you very much for listening. References at the end, and I thought I would send, like, Jules got the PowerPoint. There's some notes also on the bottom of the slides. You could share that with the conference participants. Okay, thank you. Will you give them to me?
Yes. Obrigada, professora Bárbara. Ouvindo aqui as suas colocações, eu me vi num lugar muito incômodo, porque eu fiquei durante 2 anos como editora de uma revista do nosso programa de pós-graduação, ao mesmo tempo que eu era coordenadora do programa. Então, eu era aquela pessoa que obrigava os alunos a publicar e, ao mesmo tempo, eu estava na edição da revista recusando os artigos que chegavam. Então, realmente, eu só me dei conta disso quando ela falou sobre o sistema ali capitalista de produção, né? Eu estive nesses 2 lugares, pressionando por um lado e recusando pelo outro. E isso realmente é terrível. Nós, aqui no Brasil, temos um outro modelo que os alunos têm que publicar com os professores, porque as revistas não aceitam. Tem que ter um doutor. Todas as revistas qualificadas exigem que tenha um doutor na sua autoria, né? Então, não tem jeito. Nós temos 2 perguntas, né? Professor Antônio Nova, de Portugal, disse que se o tempo da academia deveria ser o tempo longo, em que possamos ter tempo para fazer coisas, errar e refazer coisas. Você acredita que a lógica imediatista de produtividade empresarial que se instalou no meio acadêmico está descaracterizando esse longo tempo? Como nutrir esse longo tempo acadêmico para fazer coisas em um cenário que favorece a produtividade? I have him in English.
It's a question about the long time. You know, is the long time gone? And it's a question which is really interesting to me because I've been writing a little bit in the space about slow academia lately, trying to think about what it might mean to be slower. I think that one part of the question is, does the new culture of the university, has it really closed down the possibilities of the long time of scholarship, which I think the person who's asking the question kind of picked up from some of the things that I've said, that I think that it does take a long time to do things, and that that is just kind of built into the process. So is it possible how can we resist the pressure? I've even read a paper quite a while ago now called Fast Supervision, like exploring the effect of the change of culture on the practice of supervision, and looking at the ways in which supervision as a process, or advising as we call it, I think here, was becoming fast because of this kind of wider culture. I think the question of how to slow down time is a really difficult one. I sometimes think that activities like writing retreats and writing groups are really good embodiments of slower time, because when you go on writing retreats and writing groups, You have to give your time to other people's work as they give time to your work. And one of the reasons that some students don't want to be part of the writing group is because they don't have time to read other people's work. But actually, I will say to them that that is time well spent. It's a bit like the time of reading the book about Thelonious Monk. It's time off your own work. It's time where you let your mind think about someone else's work, and you have no idea what will happen as a result of that time, apart from the fact that there is an ethic of collegiality that you are offering, which is absolutely fundamental to academic life. A lot of what we do in academic life, including the reviewing of articles for journals, is done in our own time for no money. And we do it because we publish and we need reviewers for our work, but more importantly, we do it because we are part of a community of scholars in a field of scholarship which we have a stake in. We think it's important. So giving time to others in their academic work through participating in activities like writing groups, reading groups, writing retreats, and other modes like that, or just even offering to read a peer's writing, is one of the ways we sort of slow down time, because none of those things count in the performativity lists. They don't count. But they are meaningful uses of time off task of your own writing, but still immersed in the ethos, intellectual and, if you like, spiritual ethos of academic life. So how do we slow? We make choices to do things that somehow embody generosity and somehow keep occasionally a distance to that pressure for performativity. How we do this, everybody will do this in different ways. But maybe one most important thing is talk about it with colleagues. So more now these days, colleagues, we talk about this in our writing groups, at our writing retreats. Even colleagues in my school, we have these conversations. How can we support each other to try and slow down this force of academic life? So for me, one of the simplest things I do is I have a message on my email that says I don't answer emails in a hurry. So it's a kind of very small answer to a very pressing question.
A segunda pergunta é, como orientadora, como a
Second
professora
question
Grant
is,
percebe
how
as
does Professor Grant
necessidades
notice that the needs of
são
each
diferentes em
person
relação à
being
escrita?
oriented is
Diante
different in
dessa
terms of
percepção,
writing,
qual
and
atitude
given this
acha
perception, what
recomendável ser
attitude
adotada
do they feel
pelo
to be
orientador para
advisable
conduzir o
to
orientando
be
para resultados assertivos?
used by the guidance to have a assertive orientation?
It's a question, yes. You have already heard it, about how as a mentor or a supervisor, advisor, how do you find out about what the needs of your student are in relation to writing, and how do you guide each person who is different from the other to be successful? If I could answer that for you in a simple way, I'd probably make a lot of money. The relationship between the supervisor, the advisor, the mentor, and the student, the student is one of patience. I think Carolina talked about that. I think it kind of came through actually in all of our presentations of our panel, a kind of quality of paying attention to each other. So as a supervisor, advisor, paying attention, noticing. And that's difficult sometimes, because sometimes a student doesn't want to disclose themselves to their supervisor or advisor. And personally, I feel like I would not push a student to disclose if they don't want to. They're an adult, and I want to respect that autonomy. And some students come to the supervision already guarded, cautious, a little fearful maybe. They may have had difficult experiences in the past. So it actually is quite a complicated process, this process of coming to understand your student. And I would say that for me, I have had some supervision relationships where I have felt that even at the end, I have not really understood. I thought maybe I did understand my student, and then later I've wondered if I have understood. It's like any other highly invested human relationship, and it is highly invested because the stakes are so high for the student, mostly, but also for the supervisor. If a student fails or withdraws, you personally will feel, probably, I would feel shame, I would feel concern, I would feel left with loss. So it's a highly invested relationship. So figuring out how to proceed with a student around academic writing is difficult. I do have some guidelines that I give my students. This is how I do it. I do supervision. This is how I give feedback. I give them to them in writing. We have some kind of conversation about it. I'll often ask my student, at this moment, how tough are you feeling about feedback? On a scale of 1 to 10, where would you put yourself? I give them an opportunity to let me know if they're feeling quite sensitive. Sometimes we're sensitive, and other times we're not sensitive. And that goes on through academic life, actually. So asking questions, observing body language, participating in writing groups where my own students are present and watching them there. All of these are ways of observing what it is that a student might be in their own character. But it's always, I feel like a student is a mystery to me. Always, I'm improvising, and sometimes I make mistakes, and I don't even know till someone else tells me. So it's a complicated space, but if we think about the 4 students on the panel, they know, they understand it's a complicated space, and they come to it with a lot of openness, they come to it with some thought, they come to it with some built-in forgiveness, I think. So yeah, I sometimes think that my definition of advising a student is kind of muddling along and trying to do the best I can in a situation which is quite complicated and where many things are hidden.
Alguém quer fazer alguma pergunta?
Dr. BG?
Dr. Bia?
Excellent. No question, but under pressure, like in the song by singer David Bowie. Analogy de uma music. Understand?
Mais alguém tem alguma pergunta? Bom, então, agradecendo mais uma vez.
Would like to thank once again Professor Barbara Grant for her brilliant lecture, and we draw to a close this panel, and we await for everyone tomorrow, 8 a.m.
Abraço, uma boa noite.
Cheers, good evening.
Perguntas nos fazem ficar inquietos. Perguntas fazem o mundo girar. As grandes descobertas, as grandes invenções, os grandes textos filosóficos, todos partiram de uma pergunta. As respostas não são fáceis, exigem esforço e dedicação. E esse é o trabalho do pesquisador. Cada pesquisador e cada pesquisadora são pilares da ciência. São eles que movimentam e geram desenvolvimento social e humano e trazem respostas necessárias à vida moderna. E não é só isso. Também geram mais e mais questionamentos que fazem do mundo uma constante, um eterno descobrir. Nós, do Grupo CIDES, somos comprometidos com uma educação do futuro. Valorizamos e incentivamos a pergunta e, sobretudo, o trabalho do pesquisador. Venha conosco nessa grande caminhada pelo conhecimento.